Fitzroy, my pet grave, and we're still on decarbonizing Africa's blue economy. But now we want to take it a step further and we want to talk about actions. And we're going to be looking at the socioeconomic realities, finances, and pathways to action. So I'm just going to reiterate what has already been said before. Africa contributes very little to global greenhouse gas emissions, but yet we are central to the solutions. Why? Because we hold nearly half of the world's renewable energy potential. Like I was saying, Africa holds nearly half of the world's renewable energy potential. And already about 6% of our electricity is from renewable energy. But talking about the maritime industry now, we hold less than 2% of the world's ships in terms of ownership. But while over 90% of our trade is maritime based. But this is an imbalance. It doesn't only reflect vulnerabilities in Africa, but it also exposes us to the opportunities that exist within. So I'm going to talk about the framework that governs the maritime industry, which is the IMO Net Zero Framework. From 2027, all vessels above 5,000 must comply with IMO's net zero framework. And what does this mean? It means that the vessels need to be retrofitted for new fuels. It means that the vessels need to be plugged into onshore power supply when they are at berth. But the key point here is that the ships are now going to avoid ports that cannot offer them this support to be able to meet up with these demands by the IMO Net Zero Framework. And this is a risk to Africa. So African ports are now vulnerable. It's been estimated that our ports need $40 to $60 billion annually in upgrades. But yet, Africa pays 2 to 3 times more in sourcing for finance compared to our competitors in Europe. And this is worrying because 90% of our trade, like I said before, depends on shipping. So if our ports are bypassed, food imports, fuel supplies, fertilizers, and other revenues that we get from exports are all threatened. So that means there's higher costs, our GDP is going to be weakened, and then it's going to give rise to fuel insecurity. So what must we do as Africa? Number one, we need to protect our food and trade. We need to legislate the just transition that we're talking about. We need to mobilize green investments away from the regular cost that we have to incur to get capital. And finally, we need to align the policy frameworks. So the national frameworks need to be aligned with the global frameworks. So finally, we must approach IMO negotiations with priorities. And that's why we have gentlemen and our lady here. They're all experts that can actually speak to each of these issues, from the policy side of things to the legal side of things to the private sector side. We're going to hear from them shortly. So Africa needs to prioritize speaking with one voice. It needs to prioritize finance that actually works. It needs to prioritize cheaper finance for ship owners. And finally, our ports and harbors need to be transformed into energy hubs because we have the resources in Africa. So we're going to go into the session now, the panel session, and I'm going to pose my first question to our parliamentarian. He's Honorable Andre Clifford, and he's a parliamentarian with Seychelles. Okay. So, Honorable Andre, I know you have to leave now, so that's why I'm posing the question to you first. We're looking at policy safeguards, we're looking at legal reforms, and we want Africa to be competitive and resilient. So, how can African parliaments legislate to embed just transition principles, specifically food security and industrialization targets, and into our national maritime laws that can ensure that these goals will persist even after political changes? And finally, it's still in one question. Finally, what oversight mechanisms are most effective in enforcing compliance with these laws? Thank you.
You see, if I am to answer the question, I'd answer the last question first. Mechanisms to ensure or to oversee those rules and regulations are taken on board. Firstly, it is important as a parliamentarian, in most of the states or in all states, you have three arms of government, and parliamentary work is one. Most of the time, it is left as the last one to understand or to be part of anything, any law, any rules, any convention that the country has signed. Sometimes they sign and they come to us for ratification. We don't know what has happened. So, in answering this question, the last part would be that I would urge African countries to get parliamentarians on board at the very first instances. You see, we talked, the panel before that had talked about how to get financing, and it's big. Yes, it is big, but if it doesn't go through parliament, it doesn't become big. The business may be so big, so huge. If the local laws doesn't facilitate anyone or any business, may be private, to venture into such, it would not happen. So the parliamentarians, I put it, are the most important tool. They need to be part of the team where you are looking at data, research. They need to know what is happening. If they don't know, when it comes to the parliament for approval, it is either that they just approve without knowing what they are approving, or not approving without knowing what they are not approving. So you see, this is where political dynamics comes into play. So, the parliament can influence the executive heavily, because we are the ones that provide the oversight mechanisms over the executives. So the parliament needs to be part of the team that is maybe not negotiating, but understanding the negotiation that is taking place. Now, having said that, which is the second question, and since I have to leave also, I would like to say that Parliament is an important element in ensuring that any laws, any conventions, any annexes to conventions that are being negotiated by our countries comes to fruition. See, like Dr. Dola said previously, if we look at the ratification, the number of states that have ratified MARPOL Annex 6, it's very low. Why? Because the parliamentary arm are not aware. Or when it comes to us It's like, why? But why are you coming to us now 10 years after, coming to us now? That means it was not important. So why should we rush with the process now? So you see, it is important that Parliament are part of the team that ensures that the country and Africa benefits. So as Dr. Dola says, we are calling on others to join partner. And I think the partner initiative is one that is very, very, very important, because I would put it that most of the African countries probably doesn't have a maritime initiative in their own country. They don't have a maritime roadmap. They don't know where to start, where to go, what should they do. So we need to get into those countries, or in the African countries, to try and ensure that they have a maritime roadmap that would allow them to ensure that they can take appropriate steps and positive steps that would allow Africa to be positioned as one. And we need to have, when I look at meetings, we need to have pre meetings so that we can allow ourselves to understand what is going on and what we are going to deal with. I know my time is out, and I would thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Andre. Okay, so he has given us an overview of what must be done from the parliamentarian perspective. And one key thing that he said was that they need to be aware of the technicalities. They need to understand it. So that's why the next question will go to Professor Wisdom Apalo. He is with the Ghana Fisheries Commission, and he played a huge role in the LEAP project. And the LEAP project highlights that Africa's refrigerated imports and raw commodity exports are particularly vulnerable to future carbon levies. So based on this evidence, what specific evidence-based policies, now tying it back to what Andre said, what specific evidence-based policies would you recommend to reduce this vulnerability, and which one should be prioritized first? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. There is this saying that what is done for us without us does not belong to us, which means that as Africans, we have to have a voice in these processes. And first of all, I'm very happy that we have been invited to this forum to share our experiences and add to the voice of many other voices that are trying to make things better for the continent. On the question of refrigerated products that are imported, first of all, what do we import which is refrigerated? Mostly it is fish and other sea foods, which is about 90% of those imports. Now, we know that we have potentials when it comes to our marine or capture fisheries, but then we also have deficits looking at the size of the population of the continent. In fact, it is estimated that the deficit in terms of our fish consumption is about 11 million tons. And it is projected that by 2050, we will need to increase our fish production by over 70%. Which means that, and of course, countries like Ghana, where I come from, we import about 60% of the fish that we consume in Ghana. The implication is that any policy shift, if we go on this trajectory, this net zero journey, which we all know will happen because the business, the business as usual is not going to continue for long. it means that there is going to be serious implications for many countries. On the continent, about 20%, 1 in every 5, is undernourished. And fish is, of course, one of the most important food items. So once we transition, there is going to be implication for cost of fish or cost of import, and that will mean that not many people will be able to meet their animal protein requirement in terms of fish, which means that we need to have a policy to promote aquaculture, for example, which has huge potential for the continent. So in a country like Ghana, for example, where we have embarked on all kinds of initiatives, we may need to double our aquaculture production, or we have in focus doubling our aquaculture production just within 3 years to meet the growing demand for fish and the huge deficit that we have. So we need to have deliberate policies to promote the production of fish within the African countries to meet the growing demand, so that if the cost of importing these products are very high, we will not be seriously impacted. And so that's one thing I think we would, and to do that, we have to look at so many complementary policies, such as trying to come out with strategies to promote feed production for aquaculture, which feed is about 70-80% of cost of production. We need to promote hatcheries. Now when people want to farm fish, they don't have the seed or the hatchery, so we need to promote hatcheries, people to produce fingerlings. And then we also need to think about antibiotics use, policies on antibiotics use, growth hormones, etc. So we need to have a deliberate policy to promote aquaculture, since that is the main frozen food that we import, about 90%. And I think that is something we can do. And briefly about commodity exports, we know that mostly we export raw commodities. Of course, even the tax incentives are such that we rather export raw commodities than process them. But I think there should be deliberate effort for us to engage in processing and adding value to most of those commodities, and by so doing reduce even the volume that we export, although we'll pay more in taxes. And to add one more thing to all this discussion is the fact that, we've had so many good points being made. But as an economist, I insist, or I also want to add my voice to the fact that data must drive all decisions that we make. And in most cases, we don't have to do a partial equilibrium analysis. We have to do a general equilibrium analysis, because these are going to be big changes that will affect all sectors of the economy. So we can't look at one particular segment or some segment of the economy in isolation, but look at the overall impact on all the economy. So I recommend that for these studies, we should be looking at more and more into the general equilibrium effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. So thank you very much, Prof. We looked at the technical aspect to this, and he has given us a very concrete example of import and export of fish. But now, in the next, say, 18 months, by 2027, we need to start the IMO GFI registry will come into force, where the framework is going to take effect. And we have with us Captain Ladi Olubowale. He's from the private sector. He's also a CEO of a maritime company, and he's the president of African Ship Owners Association, Nigeria. They need to make commitments, because come 2027, these impacts that Africa is vulnerable to will actually start taking place. So the question is, from your private operator's viewpoint, what are the most viable opportunities for maritime decarbonization in Africa? And furthermore, what specific commitments can your members realistically undertake between now and 2027?
Okay, thank you so much. I'll just float on what they've said already. we've talked about policy, we've talked about economy. When you look at all this as well, in the business sector, it's all driven by profitability. We have to drive business continuity. We can't just stay without not working. Business must continue. So when you now look at that as well, there are strategy where you can add on that. It says 5,000 GLT. There are vessels below 5,000 GLT that does not comply. Those vessels will drive what they call profitability. And then this is where we need to come in to have what they call the strategic fleet. Our strategic fleet will cross across so many fleets that actually need for trade. We've talked about fishing now. We need quality reefers that can do the trade within Africa. We're talking about vessels that can trade within Africa. We're talking about vessels that we can actually position ourselves as a continent where we are looking at where is the future going to. We need to start having vessels that can actually be part of the supply chain. Bunkering, LNG, methanol, all those things as well. These are small economy that we can go into and start looking at. We can run those two concurrently, whereby we are not being cut off by the regulation. We can float under it. That's the secret in the industry. When you set a bar, there's a regulation that you can float under. That doesn't mean that you have to comply with. Because when you look at our maritime infrastructure, our maritime ports, all our maritime, they are wasted. I use the word wasted. They are old. They can't fit into new technology. For instance now, how many of our African ports can you fit an LNG station into it? Or methanol that is very volatile. So when you now look at that, we should start looking at about our new projects. And this is where the industry should be talking with ship owners, and everybody should be talking together for alignment. When there are capital maritime projects being on the FID space, they should be talking to each other. Because at the end of the day, you need a supply value chain, the type of vessels that will get into that space as well. So for ship owners, the readiness is, there's a lot of stranded ships everywhere. And the market, they are going to push it into Africa. We start sensitizing our members to say, see, hold on, do not buy old ships. Let's look at the strategy and what the industry needs. Because for you to have a vessel, there must be a trade. So those are the strategy we're actually doing, and we're actually conversing as well. So the future looks good if we can tie what they need, the end products, and the enablers. Everybody, what we were talking about here today, if there's no ship, if we can increase the 2% of our fleet ownership up to about 10 or 15%, we are nowhere. We're just wasting our time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, with the remaining time that we have, we don't have much time again. I've been notified. But we want to bring this, we want to harmonize all of these under the law. And Miss Elizabeth Wanreze, she is a maritime lawyer, and we want to understand how these policies can be harmonized, global and regional. So legal frameworks for maritime decarbonization vary between global, that's the IMO, and African regional charters. For example, the AIM 2050, the Green Hydrogen Strategy, the African Maritime Transport Charter, right? What specific legal reforms or regional model laws are required to align Africa's frameworks with the revised MAPO Annex 6 and the IMO's net zero framework before 2027? Thank you.
Hello, I hope you can, okay, yes, you can hear me. I see a sea of tired faces in the room. I feel under pressure as well because time is far gone, but I'll be very brief. And I think my response will be divided into two parts. The first part being, what exactly are the legal reforms we need before 2027? And the second part being exactly what Africa can do to achieve, coherence ahead of time. And from an international legal perspective, I'm at pains to say that we have a lot of laws in Africa. We have a lot of policies in Africa. We have a lot of strategies in Africa. As a lawyer, it gets quite tired where there are many policies without implementation. So I think that the next phase for Africa is not necessarily any form of policies, strategies, or laws, but implementing what we already have. And several countries are already onto this. Egypt, for instance, Tunisia, Namibia, South Africa, Ghana. In several regards, the AIM strategy, for instance, are implemented in different forms. Egypt, for instance, has, set out a 3-stage process to establish or to produce about 6 million tons of low-carbon hydrogen by the year 2040. And they also aim to contribute 8% to the global market in relation to this. So why don't we just try to democratize our own strategy? We already even have a possibility in Part 12 of the AIM strategy, which you talk about. Part 12 has a flurry of resources, a lot of policies by which Africa can just look towards in preparation for the net zero framework in 2027. And I think the second part I'll just mention is Africa's motive, I think, or there's a bit of tiredness or lack of political will for African states to participate in these negotiations, because like a panelist mentioned, I think in the first panel, Africa believes that it emits less, but suffers the most. There is hardly political will to spend money when you think you're not the offender. But I think Africa needs to change that perspective by participating, even if to hold the international community accountable. If we do not have many African countries ratifying the MAPOL Annex 6 or even participating in the net zero framework, how do we address issues that essentially will affect Africa? So even if our motivation would be to hold other countries, the greatest emitters, accountable, we need to participate. And finally, the last thing I would say is Africa must also look towards other aspects of international law that affects its international maritime framework. For instance, just recently, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea and the International Court of Justice released advisory opinions on state obligations in relation to climate change. For the International Court of Justice, that advisory opinion covered issues like state obligations for countries that produce, subsidize, or license the production of fossil fuels. And this concerns Africa. Unfortunately, we had only about 13 African countries making submissions to the ICJ for consideration. There is a certain cross-pollination in international law that affects different parts of climate change, including the maritime aspect. Africa needs to look towards participating more broadly and inwards, outwards, just to ensure that we are ready for 2027 and to hold other states accountable in the international space. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your wonderful contributions. Thanks to Dr. Honorable Andre in his absence. In order not to waste much of your time, I think we can give ourselves a round of applause. All right.